Welcome everybody to KWJS. If you're new here, welcome. I know we have at least one new person here. We host KWJS at least once a month. We try to. The second last Wednesday of every month. So thanks for joining us. If you want to learn a little bit of JavaScript, this is the place to be. So just quick announcements that we have here. For anyone curious about maybe having some conversations about future meetups or just meeting other people in the community, you could always join our Slack. So just that link right there. Again, we try to respond to messages as soon as possible, but if you want to reach us even sooner, you can contact myself, one of the organizers, or Lucas as well. We're happy to kind of have any kind of conversation, whether that's maybe doing a new talk or just practicing doing a talk in front of the group. Very happy to do so. Always looking for volunteers. If you have any questions during the talk, just to kind of keep it casual and open, you can just drop it in the chat and we can kind of bring it up as things go. Maybe the speaker that's doing the lightning talk would either save the questions to the end or maybe do it during the middle of their talk. But it's really just a casual environment where we're really trying to, again, try to meet new people and also maybe ask some questions and discuss some things together. We also have a raffle as well. So we have a sponsor, JetBrains, which gives us 2 free IDEs every single month to give away at our draw. So if you enter that raffle, you are eligible to winning one of those great IDE products. I think it's valued at $150 per year. So if you win that, you can go and choose one of their products there. A quick thank you to our sponsor. So big thank you to Vehicle. A lot of the people here on this call are also from the Vehicle team, but Vehicle has been very generous about being able to give us time to do these talks and spend some time practicing and help us kind of speaking in front of other people and kind of sharing knowledge with one another. So big thanks to Vehicle. A quick message from Vehicle. We also have these growth sessions. I know Philippe kind of quickly added that little plug there, but if you're curious about learning with us, learning about mob programming, learning about pair programming, Vehicle runs these workshops every single day. It's a quick hour and 15 where you can jump in, meet some of the devs here at Vehicle and learn a little bit with us. So you can learn anything from Vue to reviewing a book and creating good habits for development, refactoring. You can even learn some Portuguese, lots of different stuff that we got going on here. All right, back to the slideshow. And then last but not least, also thank you to JetBrains, which also gives us our free IDEs that we give away every single month. All right, without further ado, we have a lot of awesome lightning talks here tonight, so I'll pass it off.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, you guys can see I got Chrome up on the left and Game Boy on the right. Okay, cool. So recently I was messing around with a project involving my Game Boy and I learned about a browser API that I'd never heard of before called WebUSB. Like I said, never heard of it before. And I was kind of impressed by what I saw when I started using it. So I just wanted to do a demo of the project that I had been using. So over on the webcam view, I've got a Nintendo Game Boy with Tetris loaded into it, and Tetris supports 2-player gameplay when you have this link cable plugged into 2 Game Boys locally. And I was looking for ways, there's a few projects out there, but I was looking for ways to play games head-to-head on a Game Boy over the internet. And I found this one project where they use a Pico Pi as a USB controller that basically like is an adapter between the Game Boy protocol and ultimately WebSockets. So this Pico Pi, see it's got a little Raspberry Pi icon on it, same company, I guess. It is a embedded device that runs Python code. And then to connect it up to this link cable, the person who made this project designed a PCB that I ordered from directly from him, and I just soldered it together, and that gives you this little edge connector to, here, I'll disconnect it just so you kind of get the point. Yeah, so this should be pretty quick. I'll power on the Game Boy, and what I'm gonna do is plug the USB cable into my computer, and there's 2 steps to this process. The first step is Chrome is going to tell you that like WebUSB capable device was connected. So when I plug in my USB cable, you see you get a notification down here. Then when I click it, the first thing that the WebUSB device can do is it can tell Chrome to go to a given web page, and it's telling Chrome to go to this person's service that they built. It's a React app. I forgot what the backend is. I don't know if, oh, it's a Python backend, yeah. So here we are you know, step one, WebUSB invoked like opening up a page to somewhere. I'm going to pull the network tab and I'm going to connect. And if you pay attention on the right, you'll see that some of the prompts on the web page are actually going to control the state of the game. So when I connect, it's asking again for USB device, or sorry, which USB device, because this is probably explaining this wrong. There's two capabilities of WebUSB. One is plug and play, go to web page, and the other one is connect to device and start communicating with it. And you can use either independently. So this is the next step. It's saying like, hey, what USB device? And you'll see now it's showing me a music selection screen here and the game progress to music selection screen. And if I hit next, it's taking you to the basically waiting for player 2 to ready up. And when I connect, I get, in this person's implementation, I get a WebSocket connection. And when I hit start game, you'll see the game actually starts. I'm going to let a few blocks drop and you'll see the kind of events that get passed back and forth. Two-player Tetris, if you've ever played it, there's very little sophistication in the UI. It's just who has basically lost and how high is the person you're playing against, like how many levels. So you see the first block gets dropped and it sends an update saying that it's at level 2. And I think this will say level 3. And it's just saying it's like a row count, basically. And then what that's doing is it's sending that over the WebSocket, and it would relay that to other players that are connected to this game room. So that's pretty much it. I just thought it was pretty cool. If I go into serial.js for the project, you can see that this is the WebUSB API, Navigator USB, get devices, and it's looking specifically for devices that this person thinks you would load the firmware onto. TinyUSB is the library running on the Pi, and I guess he supports some Adafruit boards as well. I'm not going to really dip into how it all works, but you basically just need to know that on the Game Boy end, it is a serial communication, just like how everything electronic talks to each other. You know, somebody had to reverse engineer the protocol, but it's just a serial connection, and then it's being translated to WebSocket and then translated back to serial connection to send commands like, oh, the person you're playing against died or something like that. That's it. I just thought it was a cool thing I had never heard of before. So that's my lightning talk. Thanks.
Yay.
Thanks for sharing, Rich. It's very cool. I won't do a commentary on it. I certainly had a Game Boy once upon a time, though.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you again for sharing.
Thanks.
Nikolai, you up for it?
Yeah.
All right.
So I said that I will try to do the ABI, like application binary interface, like an operating system and program in Linux, and you can see it in your browser now with Woozy. So this is a lightning talk where you have more logos than minus, therefore it's a logos Thunderbolt. Now let's move. You probably have heard about the WebAssembly. It's a stack machine, and this nice Mozilla website, they have lots of different pictures describing what it is, but essentially it's the stack machine. So forget the registries, like whatever is on your stack, like there's like places, sort of like lines on the registry, lines in the stack is your registry. Sort of nicer way than real hardware, but otherwise it's just the hardware. And that's the memory. If you haven't seen the thing, try to go into this website called assemblyscript.org. Now, at the bottom is the actual function from which that is compiled. And at the top here is the human readable view of the binary or of the assembly. And you see, like we have initially it's a module, then that module has some memory initially, and then it also exports a function, for example. And then we see that function, for example, it's doing this manipulations with the stack. That's your computer. Now, this is a virtual ISA, and should be incredibly secure. So what can you do with that? Now, on the JavaScript side, the thing is very simple. It's a WebAssembly, and using the module instance and memory, first you can load it up, and then through more memory, you can talk with it. And that's what we're gonna do now. And again, Mozilla website is very useful in there. So messaging, think of something in that place and that WASM as a process. And that process is like your, for example, your web worker. And the best and probably the simplest, the most robust system is basically sending the messages. So how you send the messages to the web worker? You just send the message there, and then, or you listen to receive back. So this is the simplest way we're looking at it now. And basically, for example, GS side says, yo, I have a message for you. But in order to send something in this setup, you just ask WASM, hey, give me an indication where into your memory can I put stuff? Because JavaScript can actually put stuff into the memory of this WASM, but WASM process cannot get out of its own little world. And WASM is doing something. For example, it figures out, it establishes places where it expects to see something from the JS, from the embedder. And then you receive it back. JS puts all the bytes and says, hey, WASM process it. And it processes because JS and WASM, they run in the same thread. So it's sort of a nice important element which you should always remember when you're working with WASM. So from WASM to JS, things are a little bit simpler. Remember that WebAssembly object, we can give to this an environment from the external world, and then that external world can be a function which accepts those integers, which are the only parameters that can pass between the things. And then there, WASM says, here at that offset in my memory, that's the message, please process it. And then JavaScript should do something. Usually, if everything lives somewhere else, you just send bytes out and quit so that the process inside of WASM can do something else. Now, this is the page where you can actually check the code. Basically, it's just a salt library written in Rust and works in WASM and is used in the real project. Uses this message passing, but this message passing can actually sustain having not just the functions request reply, but something that lives inside of it, the async processes inside. Now, when you're in Rust, there's this nice WASM thing, was WASM pack and WASM bindgen. I highly recommend it to look at it, but you have to know, remember that this WASM bindgen is actually doing some form of message passing. And when you buy into the ecosystem of actual bindgen, you also bind into ecosystem of passing messages in a particular way, and also passing the processing token, sort of. So Rust, in the sync, in WASM, we have just one thread, but when you want it to be async, you're remembering, hey, there's nice feature, like async in Rust is cool. But in one thread, what you want is to look up this executor, local pool, local spawn, and basically the futures. And with that, like, you can have your trivial executor there. Of course, if you rely on some binaries that use sync as basically, or some locking in an old-fashioned way, you can just remove all of that. It will be just a simpler code for you. And now the WineGen ecosystem with the link above actually has this nice play between futures in the Rust and promises in the JavaScript, more so it's a JavaScript loop that runs all of the async processes in this binding. So in my case, for example, my message passing, which I described to you, a simple one, assumes that there's some internal loop may exist. Here, the idea is like, okay, my promise in JS starts to work, and then it calls WASM. So it actually starts something in WASM. So these are interesting things to keep in mind when you play with that. But otherwise, it's cool. And this is the last slide. There's Woozy. If you haven't heard about it, Woozy is basically like what the Docker was supposed to be. So probably if it's a longer running process, there should be some async, basically executor and reactor, something that reacts and starts async processes inside of itself. And this thing is actually Woozy, WASM system interface. It's actually how this WASM that is inside reacts to the outside world. And these things, like the guy Solomon Hykes, he said, well, if it existed, we wouldn't do the Docker on that. But at the same time, now they do this Woozy. And when you look into what they do, for example, what do you pass into WASM so that WASM actually operates on the open file descriptor? They decided not to pass a Unix-like API. They decided to actually pass something like an object, which sounds more like your like Fuchsia, like basically principle of least authority things. So anyhow, that's fun as well. And there's even a crosslet for that. I'm generously over time. Thank you.
Not a problem. Thank you for sharing. Maybe for discussion later, but I am curious on how you got into this kind of thing, because there are certain things that I feel bad for not knowing, and this is one of those things that it piques the interest, but don't know where to start yet. So, well,
it just ties back into the Tetris thing, going binary and stuff.
For sure.
Actually, the first time I ever did the hey, here's the stack, here's how your overstack happens in C. Shoot, that's what's the problem is all about, this overstack, stack overflow things, right? I did it in the tool from Mozilla, great guys. When this WebAssembly was starting, because before WebAssembly there was ASM, and there was this little tool where, you know, you type your stuff and here shows what happens. Sort of like, I cannot say that it was really this WASM, but yeah, that's how you get introduced these days into the binary. And then to operators for shifting the bits, it's also only in JavaScript. That's what you do. Forget the C. You may rust it.
That's great. Thank you again for sharing, both of you guys so far. Justin, you good to go?
Yep.
All right, the screen is all yours.
Cool. All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk about Nux.js 3. First, myself, obviously I'm a developer at Vehicle here. My day-to-day is usually just back-end TypeScript focused. I do have some good experience with React.js, but my experience with Vue is rather minimal. And I'm definitely not a Nux expert. This is just what I found cool about the framework and their new version during some initial exploration. So the reason I wanted to share this today was there's about 1 million JavaScript frameworks out there that all do the same thing, and that's help you build web apps faster. Nux 3 I just found really easy to get up and running with, and they have like a simple and minimalistic approach almost out of the box. A lot of frameworks have a lot of bloating and stuff. You start off with a massive project. You just don't need all of that right away. And I was just amazed by how quick Nux let me get set up and running so easy with a minimal amount of code and scaffolding. So Nux 3 is currently a release candidate. It's not a stable version yet. We're still working on it. It is a full stack Vue framework, so you can write your front end and your back end in tandem at the same time in the same project. They support hybrid rendering, so you can have server-side rendered routes and client-side rendered routes, and you can opt in to which you like per page. It's open source, it's all available on their GitHub. It's fully type safe out of the box, native TypeScript support, which to me is really important in a framework nowadays. Uses Vite as its bundling tool, and it has their Nitro engine as the back end that they completely rewrote from scratch and works awesome from what I've seen so far. The new features I wanted to share today were what I call the AutoMagic Routing. So you simply include one component and a pages directory, and from there they handle everything else. You don't have to mess with ViewRouter or for React guys, React Router, which is really nice. The data fetching capabilities, state management, head management, and server routes. So we'll touch on all of these a little bit. Routing. So if you're writing a modern SPA, chances are you have a few different pages within your SPA, and you've used ViewRouter or React Router, and you've gone through the hell of setting all of those up, but they don't work. You get 404s. Nux handles all of that for you out of the box. You simply just include a pages directory, and your index.view will be your root homepage. Then every other file you have in here will be mapped to its own route. They're just Vue components. It's super easy. And you can opt to not use this. So if you don't include a pages directory and you just have a single app.view that is your entire app, Nux will know not to even include ViewRouter and all the supporting dependencies. So it'll minimize your bundle size. But if you do want to include it, all you need to do is create that pages directory and use the Nux page component, and they'll handle all the scaffolding for you. Data fetching. If you're writing a JavaScript app in 2022, you're probably interfacing with an API or about 100 of them. So they provide use fetch and use lazy fetch composables out of the box. The only difference between the two, use fetch will block page navigation while it waits for data to load. Use lazy fetch won't. It'll just allow you to show a loading state. They're really easy to implement to not only get your data, but also handle a loading state. They provide you a method to easily refresh your data and any error handling that you might need to do. From we had a growth session about this where we played around with Nux data fetching. It seemed that they cache the API calls. So every time you refresh your page, they won't re-hit your API unless you manually tell it to or disable this option in your setup, which is really nice. And if you're using server-side rendered routes, your initial page load will actually, on the back end, Nux will invoke that method locally instead of running it through an HTTP request. So it saves all that overhead, and your data is available immediately in your rendered HTML. So that initial page load becomes much quicker because you're not waiting for your page to load, build your JavaScript, run your JavaScript, and then make another API call. This is just a little funny side-by-side of Nux 3 data fetching versus React. Completely out of the box. I know there's lots of React libraries that abstract this away and make it much more Nuxty-like, if you will. But out of the box, this is how you would typically handle data fetching in React. I'm sure we've all written the use effect that runs on mount with the async method inside of it that you immediately invoke. Then you have all your different state objects and whatnot. Nux handles all of this for you natively, which to me is just super awesome. The next feature is state management, which again, every JavaScript framework has a way to handle this. Don't know if I love or hate Nux way yet. So you just use their use state composable. You give it a unique key, which defines it in their store. And then immediately it's available across all of your components. That part is nice. The part that I don't know if I like yet is that every other component can directly mutate any part of your state at any time. So it's not really safe. It's not really safe to trust your own store, which to me is kind of weird, but I'm sure they're working on it. And I'm sure there's other ways already implemented that I just haven't discovered yet. And you can define custom composables such as use foo that you see here on the right. And then Nux will scan that directory and automatically make all of that state available within all of your components. Head management, I think, is something that's overlooked a lot nowadays. And if you ever deployed a React app or any JavaScript app for that matter, you kind of know that you'll see that you need to enable JavaScript to run this app. And that's like the only content that the search engine shows. That's because a lot of JavaScript frameworks use the index.html simply as a template, and there's no content there until your app is built on the client side and then produces that index page for you. Right out of the box, Nux gives you a use head composable. you give it an object, and you can essentially change any part of the head tag on your index HTML, which boosts your SEO greatly, right out of the box. And yeah, it just makes it easy, and it's something you don't have to worry about. I'm sure you probably pulled in React Helmet to do this on a React project before. So Nux thought of all of that. And this is the use Headcomposable. Super easy, super intuitive. No more React app titles on your page without Googling, how do I change my title? You simply just use this on each component or each page you want. It'll change the title. You have full access to the meta object. It'll change into meta tags. Any other thing you want in your head tag on your page, you'll be able to change here. Lastly is the server routes. Love it or hate it, developing your API and your SBA side by side. It is nice to have them all in one place. And the benefit here too is as soon as you write your API, your front end is going to know about all of the types. So it's fully type safe, all your API calls. And they use this H3 HTTP framework, which is fully open source. I don't know why they chose this instead of some more popular ones, but they did. It works well from what I've seen. It's pretty minimal, but also very powerful. So with all that being said, I do have a little demo app to just kind of show some of these concepts. So on the right, you have the most beautiful web app you've ever seen. I'm going to start bottom up here. So this is the index file. So this is the app.view, and you see I have one single component here. And by including that, it now knows to look at index.view in the pages directory, which here is just a simple title and these Nux links that makes navigation super easy. So if we head on over to head management, you can see here, I've just called the use Headcomposable right away in the script tag. And if we look at the produced HTML in the head tag, you'll see it's applied everything that I've told it to, which the more you research about SEO and modern JavaScript apps, the more you realize this is super necessary. So I definitely recommend checking that out. We go back here to the state management page. You can see all I've done here is define counter as a piece of state that starts at 0. And then I import these two composables that are defined, use foo.ts and use bar.ts. And if you've ever used React and Redux and stuff, you know that there's a lot more boilerplate involved in defining state than this. So it's nice that it's very minimal. And if I increment the counter, cool thing, I promise you guys cross component state. This is the data fetching page, which I'm about to navigate to. Basically the same call to use state, and this is a unique key in the store, and I'm just displaying it. So now the counter, I'll set it to 15. So if we go back to the data fetching page, you'll see we're displaying here, current counter is 15. So it really is cross component state right away. And last but not least, this is the data fetching. No, not mode, no, node modules. So data fetching, we have, this is that use lazy fetch code snippet you saw where we have the data, the pending, which is loading state, the refresh method to refresh your data, which you can see on the button click here, simple call to refresh, we'll redo the API call, and then an errors object. So right away, see on the initial render, all this data has been bundled already from the backend, so there's no API call. And if we throttle this to be really slow and refresh it, and see in my view here, I just have a simple v if it's pending to show a loading state. It'll just simply show the loading state, won't block navigation or anything. And then your data is there, which, I don't know. I really like this. This was my favorite feature from Nux 3. I'm gonna end the talk here, but I highly recommend trying it out. And if you don't love this, seeing this in a JavaScript framework, I don't know, I do, because I've written that React hook too many times, so.
Thanks for sharing, Justin. I did enjoy working with you on this for that one session, that one time.
And yeah, it did give us just as many troubles as most JavaScript frameworks do. Yeah. I failed to mention that, but we got it working in the end.
We're developers. We like problems sometimes too, right?
Yeah, as someone who was using a lot of Nux back like 3 years ago, it's pretty awesome to see how much the API become cleaner with the composition API being brought into it. So that was very interesting to see. Thanks for sharing, Justin.
Great. Any questions?
I have a question. I know there's some view tool in Chrome that you can open and see like your view components and state, and Nux is probably visible there, I assume, right?
View dev tools, I would think so, because it is just a view app, but Nux also has their own dev tools as well, that is built for the framework that I've used. It shows your components and all the Nuxy things that Vue doesn't show you.
All righty. Well, I don't believe I've seen Adam yet, so I can fill in the gap with that. And I guess my intro on this thing is I've been working on a personal project for vehicles, specifically around team planning. And I was writing the backend in Laravel for the longest time, and realized that, you know what, there's some stuff that I want to do on the client side or the server side, depending on the specific thing that I'm doing. So I thought, maybe I should rewrite this in Nest and start playing around with it. So this talk is not about using Nest and trying to inform people because I'm a noob myself, but I have picked up type ORM in the last few days and started playing around with that and just trying to get my bearings on it at the moment. But I guess one or two of the things that I wanted to show is trying to figure out where I'm going to draw the boundaries on the service side of things, so that I can have one test that tests out the service and how that interacts with the database, and then everything else can be just something that's stubbed in against that interface on it. So I'm going to switch over to a screen share, and I'll show you the little bit of work that I've done on this so far. There are no slides, as is my norm. Okay, can everybody see me okay? All right, I'm going to switch into presentation mode. And this will be fairly brief unless anyone has any questions about things, but the team service is the thing that I've been playing around with the most. And this team service, one of the things that I wanted to have was something similar to Laravel's database transactions trait. So that was one of the first things. The type ORM documentation talks about how to wrap everything in a transaction and then roll it back. So one of the first things I did on the testing here is build this transaction helper where you can pass in the data source and then have the interaction go within the context of that transaction and have it basically roll everything back at the end. So if I dig into this specific test method, this is almost pulled verbatim from the documentation in type ORM for how to use it. And I can share the repo if anyone's interested in seeing it, but you basically just build up the query runner and you run your connection and start your transactions and do all the work around this. And then the manager that comes from this query runner inside type ORM is the thing that we're actually going to pull the repository object for type ORM to make the requests from. So if I go back on this, I'll maybe jump between the two, calling the contents callback that goes into this function and passing the runner manager. That's the thing that I'm dealing with right now. So the manager lets me pull the repository out and then I can do all the work against it. I'm not actually going to run the test because I've been doing it on my personal machine rather than the work machine, which is this, and I'm having trouble actually running it right now. So trust me, it works on a normal system. It just doesn't seem to be working on this one specifically. So one of the other things actually that just as a quick tour through this thing, I was playing around with doing a map to create a bunch of teams so that I can do a list endpoint based on a bunch of information. I don't see any kind of factory support built into type ORM natively. And I thought this was kind of a cool thing. If you're ever doing a map against something that's going to take like an array of names and turning them into something that gets created asynchronously, just wrap it in a promise all, await that, and then you're good to go. So I know I was having problems with the test not waiting for things to happen unless I did like a for loop, traditional for loop on things. So I thought that was kind of cool, the awaiting the promise all and then passing your map into that. But yeah, outside of that, basically the interface on this service is pretty simple. So I've got a list, create, find, update, and delete method on here that have to return teams. So the plan going forward on this project basically is going to be define the interface for all the services, build, test, or stub versions of this thing specifically that maybe take in a couple predefined teams or whatever return value is going to be, and then passing that into the injected services or into the injected modules and controllers. So yeah, that's that's it so far. Type ORM was a little bit interesting because I don't know if I can comment on the maturity of it, but it was interesting to see the migration creation. The script that I'm running on this thing basically is you run a type ORM and then migration generate, and then it builds. This is basically what the migration looks like. So it's interesting because it's an ORM that will write against a bunch of different sources, but when you generate your migrations, it seems to build up the SQL statements for those. So I'm not sure if that abstraction is quite there yet. So it has been kind of cool to play around with so far. Does anybody else have any experience with type ORM? I was kind of curious. Or alternatives. It's okay if not.
Type ORM was used by some of our teams working with Able2. I know.
Yeah, we use it on Quest.
Cool.
And by we, I mean other people on my team. I don't mess with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is just yesterday was basically the first time I started messing around with it. But when you go to the Nest documentation and go to the database page for it, this is the first thing it talks about. So I figure why not? But yeah, I've heard of people using it too. So yeah, that's pretty much it so far for me.
We were using a project today with type ORM. Sorry, we were doing a project today on that. And then I was just curious to see if under the hood we had some SQL queries stuff. But then like I went through the files, but I couldn't find anything. Do you know a way that where we can see like what actually happens under the hood when we use the delete method or the find method?
There was something. I didn't find the docs were very good on type ORM myself, especially when you get into the repos, but I do remember seeing something in the API that was talking about getting the SQL dump, I think.
Oh, SQL dump. Okay.
I can take a look for it. I found the documentation wasn't very good for it. But there are type definitions along with everything, and that's what I've been doing. I've just been clicking through and trying to figure out what I can from that. So yeah, for sure. I can follow up and see if I can spot anything if you don't find anything first.
Thanks, Lucas.
Cool.
Do you have, does it have a prepared statements and that there's a statement first prepared and then it's injected properly, not unlike this, which looks like a place for SQL injection?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was the generated migration from the models that are there. I don't know if this is representative of what it would normally do.
Yeah.
Honestly, sorry.
Yes, so basically that's what they generate. So it's assumed the good input, but it's supposed to have the prepared statement, right?
Yeah.
What you use it.
Type ORM seems to have two commands. One is called get query and one's called get SQL, and then you can log it out. So like you'd have your chain of methods or whatever that type ORM provides, and then the last thing you do is say get query, if that's what was being asked. Yeah. Just to get the computed, like the generated SQL statement, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically, so that you don't do it yourself.
I did find, I mean, between the documentation that seemed a little lacking to me, and being spoiled from Laravel, I was a little surprised to look at the migration stuff and think, oh, really? Because there is a way to set up your migrations through the ORM, I believe, but it looked pretty verbose to me. Again, I mean, I have about a day and a half experience on this thing, but yeah, it seems testable. That was kind of my first question about it, and it's now tested, so that's good. Cool. That's it for me. Thank you for the participation there, everyone.